Welcome back to our Mussar study group. I am Batya Gage. So glad you've joined us this week as we continue to work together to strengthen our midot, our character traits, the very character traits that we need to walk out the mitzvot in Torah. So this week, where we are here in Texas, especially here in Paradise, the sun is shining. My irises are blooming. Night before last, we had a thunderstorm. The dandelions are popping up, and I'm beginning to see little shades of green in our grass. Has spring come here in January? Well, I don't. I'm a warm weather person, so I hope so. I love early springs, um, but I'm usually caught off guard in February and March with one last more cold spell or more. But hopefully this continues. I'm really enjoying it. Um, there is a day on the calendar, actually tomorrow, that is called Tu B'Shvat, which literally means the 15th of Shavat. And it kind of is an indicator of spring as well. It is the what they call the birthday of the trees, especially in Israel. It's the earliest time for the trees to emerge from their winter rest and to get ready to start blooming. So it's a lot of people, especially in Israel, will go out and plant trees on this day. So it is our little bit of an indication that at least spring is on the way, if not already peeking its head out. Well, last week we studied in our spiritual practices book, we studied equanimity, one of the ones I really have to work on often. This week we are studying the trait of Yirah. Now, we have studied this trait many times, but usually we study it, we look at it as two sides of a single coin. On the one side, Yirah means fear of consequences, fear of punishment. You flip the coin over, and on the other side, it's awe of Hashem's majesty. For some reason, our current author has chosen to divide those into two lessons. So this week we will be looking at Yirah from the perspective of fear of consequences. Then next week we will actually finish our book, if you can believe it, with awe of Hashem. So our author starts off by talking about amygdala. Now, I had to look that up because I'm not much on A&P, physiology and anatomy, but they are two almond-shaped clusters of nuclei located deep within the temporal lobes of the brain. And they perform a very primary function for us. They process things like fear, anxiety, aggression. It's also responsible for the fight or flight response that oftentimes can keep us out of danger. Our author continues that fear has been keeping us alive for many, many thousands of years. And we are finely tuned. Our brain is finally, very finely tuned to recognize danger. Our brains can react to danger 100 times more than our conscious brain can realize that this is a real threat or not. That's why when someone jumps out at you, you may scream first and then realize, oh, there's no threat. So is it any wonder that we have to work on fear to keep it in check? We have to work all the time to make sure that the fear doesn't well up. In fact, we have seen over the last year or so how easily a country or world can be controlled by fear. So fear is a very basic response in our brains. However, our brains cannot tell the difference between a real threat and a not real threat. So, for example, your to your brain, your boss yelling at you one day is the same level of threat as if you were in the wild and being attacked by a huge predator. The response in your brain is the same, which is why you may have those feelings of anxiety or heart beating fast or all of those. Fear does come from the evil inclination. We've studied many times, even though we call it the evil inclination, we have studied how important the evil inclination is to our continuation as a human species. Just like we talked about, fear at times can protect us from danger. And it also includes things like the desire to reproduce and things like that. Fortunately, it is balanced out with the good inclination. Now, the impulses that come from the good inclination are they say from the prefrontal cortex. Again, I'm not much on A&P, but I had to look this up. The part of the brain that is involved with thinking, with relationships, with logic. So we need both to be a complete person. You don't need to be analyzing a situation when there's an immediate danger. You need your evil inclination to jump in at that moment and save you from a real danger. You know, we have in our shul, Magen Yeshenu, some amazing scholars. You may be one of them, or you may have run across some of them. They love to study, and they dig out every meaning of every phrase, every Hebrew word. They cross-reference to other sources. They look for all those hidden meanings. It's wonderful. We have some amazing true scholars. But I love to tease them sometimes and say, oh, all that Torah learning is good, but without Mussar, really, what good is it? And I tell them, you know, all the Torah learning in the world, if someone knows Torah, has it memorized, has Talmud memorized, but they don't care about their fellow, what does it mean? Our author says that this is from the Talmud. One who has the Torah but not fear of heaven is like a treasure who has been given the inner keys but not the outer keys. Now, our author tries to put that into modern language by saying you have the keys to a car but not the keys to the garage. So it really does you not a whole lot of good. Traditional Mussar teaches that fear of Hashem, fear of heaven, are the keys to developing good behavior. We do good because we fear the consequences. Even the Shema, think about even in the Shema when we recite it, it says if we listen and we do the commandments, there will be rain. If we don't, the anger of Hashem will blaze against us and he will close up the heavens and there will be no rain. Consequences. Actions have consequences. You know, when back before the pandemic, when Menashe, my husband, was the chaplain, one of the chaplains at the Tarrant County Jail, he would go and they would have classes, and he would tell the inmates something like this: if you knew Torah and you followed Torah, you wouldn't be in this place. Consequences. Now, fear can be a really great motivator. It can motivate us to do things or to stop doing things, but it only goes really so far. Imagine the son who's a little bit afraid of his very strict father, who's been told to mow the lawn. His father has warned him of the consequences if he doesn't do it. So he does the minimum required to not get punished. Now, on the other hand, imagine a son who loves and adores his father and just barely hears that his father wants the lawn mowed. He will go to great lengths to make that lawn look beautiful for his father. So you can see the difference between being motivated by fear and being motivated by something higher like love. But on the other hand, Proverbs 9:20 says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But I've often heard that we are not supposed to fear. I heard one time that I haven't checked this out. There's 365 occurrences of do not fear in the Bible, one for each day. Now, I don't know if you've ever checked that out, but I've heard that many times. So what did Yeshua say about fear? Matthew 10:28, he says, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Instead, fear the one who is able to destroy both soul and body in Gehenna, in hell." So he tells us that there is an appropriate time and place for fear, but it's not of our fellow man. So what does that fear look like if it's out of balance? If we have too much fear, we're afraid to do anything. We're afraid to take risks. And without taking risks, we never get out of our comfort zone. We never grow. So to grow, we have to take some risks. Getting ahead in business, doing something extraordinary requires us to learn new skills, to try things new that maybe we're afraid to do. What about you women giving birth? That can be scary if you've never done it, even if you have done it. Now, too little fear, and we end up like the inmates at the Tarrant County Jail. We have no regard for Hashem's mitzvot or even the local law. Too little fear of what happens in the afterlife can have eternal consequences. So our fear needs to be appropriately balanced. So how do we cultivate the right kind and amount of fear? Our author suggests, and we've read this before, one is to always keep the thought of Hashem before us. Know before whom we stand every day. Consider that we are always standing in the presence of Hashem. Psalm 16:8 says, "I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved." Now, some people will put this on a poster or a card. I've even seen some beautiful plaques of this verse, and then they'll hang it in the place where they pray so that they can focus on it and put the Lord before them always. Another way is and I should have gotten the book out, but I forgot, was if you do every blessing that there is in Judaism, they say your average every day would be about 100. So if you're blessing Hashem 100 times a day, you're going to keep him before you always. And just the set times of prayer, the morning prayers, the afternoon prayers, the bedtime prayers, this will also keep Hashem before you at all times. Our author gives us our daily practice. If this is your midah for the week, is to cultivate the appropriate fear. He says, first you have to come up with your reminder phrase. You might want to use the Psalm 16:8 that says, "I have set the Lord before me always," or the one from Proverbs 9:10. "The beginning of wisdom is the fear of Adonai." Those are both good ones. Or come up with your own. The next thing is to observe. Observe your current behavior, journal. Notice throughout the week what things bring you fear, what things cause you fear. Are you fearing man, or are you fearing Hashem, the consequences of not obeying Hashem? Is your fear making you cautious, paralyzed? Is it keeping you from doing new things, learning a new skill? Notice when your fear gets irrational or out of balance. And of course, record all of this in your journal. The next thing is to act. And the book suggests to look for other soul traits that may be out of balance. We know how interconnected they all are. And so look for another trait perhaps that's out of balance. Are you a worrier? Some of us are worriers. What kinds of things do you worry about? Record these in your journal. And then remember that Hashem is ultimately in control of the outcome. in your journal, write down the actions that you took and what were the consequences of those actions so that you can clearly connect that these actions have consequences. And they suggest again, or I suggest writing down Psalm 16:8 and placing it on your wall in the place where you pray. Begin the habit of reciting the 100 blessings a day. Become knowledgeable of those different things that you bless Hashem for throughout the day, and that will help keep him before you. Next week, as we finish our book, we're going to flip that coin over, and we're going to look at Yirah from the perspective of awe of Hashem, which is my preferable perspective on fear. All right, let's look at our other book, the Mussar Torah commentary. We're in this week, the Torah portion is Beshalach. It comes from Exodus 13:17 through 17:16. Hopefully you've had a chance to read that this week. We're going through a very exciting period in our Torah portions right now. Last week we studied about the Exodus from Egypt. This week we get to study about the crossing of the Red Sea. Now, about this time of year, especially between now and Pesach, I have a couple of movies that I really like to watch. Of course, the first one is the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, a great, great, great movie. But another one that I like is the animated movie Prince of Egypt. It's got some really great songs in it. And one of the songs I really like from that movie is actually sung by the character Yitro. And it's called Through Heaven's Eyes. If you remember that, or go find it on Spotify. It's a great song. But it talks about a tapestry, a beautiful tapestry. And the picture on the front of the tapestry is made by tying knots on the back of the tapestry. So if you're on the back of the tapestry, you can't see what the beautiful picture is on the front, the beautiful finished picture. When I was a kid, I also used to love to paint by number. Now, I wasn't for sure, except for looking at the box or whatever, what the outcome of the picture was going to be. I just knew that number 1 was red and number 2 was yellow, and I had to trust those instructions. And even though I couldn't see the finished product until I colored in all the colors. I also remember a time when I was teaching a children's class many years ago that I was trying to teach them this concept, and I had just a regular puzzle of a tree or something. But secretly on the back of the puzzle, I had glued a picture of the Torah. And so, but they didn't know that. And all they knew is they had all these little pieces. So as they put the pieces together and I flipped the picture over, then we could see the whole picture, the Torah. Now, I've often had this recurring thought that we are all kind of pieces of Hashem's puzzle. And, we're running around with our one piece. And instead of bringing all the pieces together, we go off in the corner with our one little piece. And unfortunately, many have created entire religions or denominations or sects based on just having one piece of the puzzle instead of seeing the whole picture. Our book gives us another metaphor that it wants us to consider, and that is the toy, if you ever had one, and I did, many of us probably did, called the spirograph. It's a little circular thing with all these little holes, and then you had like a little frame. You put your paper underneath it, put your pen or your marker in one of the holes, and begin to move that spirograph around this frame. Now, at first, all you see is a bunch of squiggly lines, but as you continue to complete this pattern, eventually you will see a masterful, beautiful graphic design. Whether we're creating a tapestry or we're drawing with a spirograph, if we are a single thread or a single piece of the puzzle and we're in the middle of this creation, we don't know. Are we in the right place? Are we going in the right direction? We may not always know. Now, in our Parsha this week, the Israelites have seen amazing miracles to get them out of Egypt. But then we read in Exodus 13, 17, and 18 that Hashem does not then lead them in a straight path, straight over to the promised land. Rather, he leads them on a very, there used to be a cartoon, Family Circus, and they would send the little boy to go take the trash out or whatever, and it would show his path, and it would be all over the neighborhood before he actually made it to the trash. God, it says God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by way of the wilderness of the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds. So how do we know if we are on the right path, if we're heading in the right direction? Sometimes our path is so long and windy. Surely we have taken a wrong turn somewhere. This is not where I'm supposed to be. The children of Israel knew they were on the right path, and yet they end up at the shore of the Sea of Reeds in front of them, with the Egyptians pursuing them behind them. They must have wondered, did we take a wrong turn somewhere? Did we miss an instruction? In Duties of the Heart, Bachya ibn Pakuda, maybe we'll study that book one of these days, but it's a pretty intensive, extensive Mussar study. He was a foremost Mussar master. And he explains our trait this week. And our trait for this week from this book is Bitachon. You may remember that is trust. He describes it like this: tranquility of the soul and liberty of the mind. Oh, that's beautiful. Living with Bitachon, he says, is living with a deep sense of assurance that the things happening in the world are both God's will and for the good. We've studied it so many times. Everything Hashem does is for the good. Sometimes we have to keep repeating that to ourselves as, things continue to happen. And then he continues with a discussion of whom can you trust? If Bitachon is trust, whom do we trust? And he gives us 7 criteria for who you can put your trust in. And here they are. They must be compassionate. They must never desert you. They must be strong enough to accomplish what you need. They must know what is good for you. They must be responsible for you and to you throughout your entire life. Your well-being must be in their hands alone. And they must always be generous and kind. Now, once we get to the bottom of this list, we can quickly see there is no human that meets all these. And we have all been through probably multiple experiences this last year in which we have put our trust in someone and it didn't work out very well. So he says we quickly see that there is no human. It is only Hashem. Hashem alone can we trust. And we should only place our trust in him. And we're kind of sitting in a similar place. Before us is an administration unknown to us. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know what's going to happen. Behind us is a pandemic still pursuing us. We might have an inkling of how the Israelites felt as they stood there. But Think about Miriam. She had just raised her tambourine to rejoice in the song of the praise at the sea. The sea split, they went through it, they're saved, and the women go out with Miriam to rejoice and play their timbrels. And then what do the people do? They begin to grumble that they don't have water to drink. Exodus 15:24, they said, if only we had died by the hand of the Eternal in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death. Exodus 16:3. Our commentary says this: no matter that we have conquered so much, miracles have been wrought in our lives, diseases eradicated, slavery rejected, technology invented to bring healing to the sick, closeness achieved between those who are separated across the world, and yet so much angst remains in the world. And when we continue to complain in a world of plenty. Oh my, every single week, Hashem seems to single me out for these lessons. It's painful. I had one of those days this week where I began to look all around me. Things just weren't going like I wanted them to. I was down. I was full of angst, and I was there. So this got to me as well. Our commentary goes on. We Jews are duty bound to see not just the broken shards of some pottery or glass, but not just to see the random lines on the spirograph, not to just see the knots and the strings on the back of the tapestry. We are to see beauty. We're to cultivate gratitude, perspective, and vision. Even though our paths may feel like, as Hashem led them on the long route of the sea, we need to cultivate this trait of Bitachon, of trust that we are, in fact, on the right path. But on the other hand, there's always another hand. This concept of Bitachon is made much more complex when we realize that, as Bachia ibn Paguta taught, some things are in God's hands and some things are in our hands. And humans make choices, and choices have consequences. And sometimes those choices are not always good, and the consequences are devastating. He goes on to teach us that it is wrong for us to completely trust Hashem in those areas that are within our control. Hashem has given man free will. So, for example, let's say you're sitting at home on your couch. You're just waiting for Hashem to drop money from the roof. That's not what we should be doing. We should go out, do our best, get a job, work hard, and then trust Hashem with the results. He goes on to say, it is our choice whether to follow the mitzvot as we understand them or not. If we do, then we can trust that we have done all we can and that the rest is subject to trust in Hashem. You know, it can be difficult at a particular time, in a particular place in our journey to know, are we facing a situation in which we just need to let it go and say, God, I'm trusting you? Or is this a situation where I need to be doing something, going in a different direction, resisting the path that maybe I need to take a turn? You know, we can assume that Hashem and Moshe would have found a way to give food and water to the Israelites, even if they hadn't complained. But the Israelites' inability to master this trait of Bitachon affected the way they experienced this journey. Hashem would have still gotten them there with plenty of food and water, but their journey was full of pain and fear. instead of joy and rejoicing like Miriam. Miriam, on the other hand, understands this. In her own need to hang on to Bitachon, she takes her tambourine. She brought it all the way from Egypt. And she also doesn't know what the future is going to hold, but she knows that this is a time to rejoice. Life is full of tragedies, but in the events of life do not make up the path of life. And that's where we sometimes get our focus on this event that's happening instead of looking at the entire journey. The power to rejoice in the miracles that have already happened and to trust that we have done all we can do. This changes our experience of the events, even if the events themselves do not change. Our journey will be better. Our commentary ends this week's lesson with these words. The Mussar emphasis on Bitachon invites us to consider that the road in front of us is the right path because God is waiting for us. Even if we take a different turn, maybe even a wrong turn, God will be waiting there too. And when we look back at the pattern of our lives, we will see holiness. All right, questions to ask as we end up this week. It's a very exciting week of Torah study. If this is your midah for the week, if Bitachon is your midah, here's some questions. And the first one is interesting. Augustine is reported to have said, pray as if everything depended upon God and work as if everything depended on you. I've also heard it said, pray but keep rowing to shore. How do these words support you as you cultivate trust in Bitachon? Where, metaphorically, do you need to be bringing your tambourine? Trusting that you will need it to rejoice. If not today, at some point in the future, there will be a moment when it'll be time to rejoice. Do you find yourself grumbling like I did this week, even when you possibly have just witnessed something wonderful? So how can you become more appreciative of the wonders occurring on the path that you are on? Practice. So as you put this midah into practice this week, if you have a spirograph, pull it out and play with it, draw it. And where are you on that crooked path? Are you where you can't see what the outcome is? Are you like, man, I must have taken a wrong turn? Or can you begin to see a pattern forming as you go through your life? Or is it time just to keep walking until you can see more of the picture? Well, that is our lesson for this week. It was a little bit short, but that's okay. Next week, we will finish our book, The Spiritual Practices of Good Actions. Then we will be taking a break for a little while, at least probably, I would say probably until after Purim, maybe. As many of you know, unfortunately, my husband is going through some very serious health issues. And also at the same time that our shul is going through a lot of developmental issues, and I'm going to take a few weeks off to kind of focus on those things. So, but you still have your Mussar Torah commentary, and it continues on every week for the next year. And as you study for these next few weeks, I would encourage you to, as something comes up that you want to share, we have a Facebook page. I still have that up. And for you that are part of our shul, I did create, as requested, a Magen Yushenu Mussar page on Signal. And so post, what you're thinking over the next weeks. We can still stay in touch. We just won't be here on Tuesdays afternoon for a few more weeks. I'm still trying to determine when we come back together what text we'll be studying. I've looked at a few. If you have something you want me to look at, then, send that to me and I would be glad to take a look at that. In our spiritual practices book this week, we looked at one side of that coin of Yirah, the side of fear, in the perspective of fear of punishment, fear of consequences. We reminded ourselves that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of Adonai. Yeshua taught that we should fear Hashem, but not man. Our Yirah, of course, as all traits, must be balanced. If we have too much fear, we're too afraid to do anything and we don't grow, we don't take risks. Too little fear, and we disregard the commandments altogether. In our Mussar Torah commentary, we studied Bitachon, trust. As our paths go this way and that way, we must do what is in our power to do, and then trust Hashem with what is in his power to do. Trust him with the results. We do what we can, and then trust him with the results. Well, thank you for joining me today. I hope that where you are, you're beginning maybe to see a few little bitty signs of spring. If not, you can, I would encourage you to, if you don't know much about Tu B'Shabbat, go out on the internet and find something about it. Chabad is always a good place to learn about it. And it's a fun time to eat new fruits that maybe you've never eaten before. Some people even do a whole Seder that's kind of patterned after the Pesach Seder. And it's interesting because you have 4 cups of wine, but they go from white of winter, the white of winter, and then each cup gets more red until you get to the 4th cup, which is the most red, which symbolizes the warmth of summer. So it's a fun thing to do. If nothing else, go out and buy you a new fruit that you've never eaten and do the blessing. Hopefully you come back next week and we can finish up this part of our study. Share the video if you would like, and we will see you next week. Have a great week.